Well, thank you for having me here tonight. My name's Jagwaa. Um, I'm a local First Nations woman. I'm from the Sheets-Gittini clan of Haida-Gwaii, BC. Most of my family still lives in BC, and I'm just very honored to speak at this event because I just lost one of my cousins to a fentanyl overdose about 3 weeks ago. So this dream catcher you see over here is actually just made for him and has his picture on it. And unfortunately, he's not the first loss in our family, just being Indigenous. We've just had so many losses. Like the majority of my family has addiction issues, and I'm one of the only sober people in my family. Sorry. Calling time. But it hasn't always been that way. You know, my dad is a residential school and 60 scoop survivor, and he's been struggling with addiction for most of his life. So when it came to having my sisters and I started drinking with my dad when I was about a toddler, and I never learned to put the bottle down until I was about 27 when I lost my mother. And when I looked at all of my family and saw their addictions, I decided that I didn't want that life for me, so I put a hard stop to my drinking at a fairly young age, and I've never really looked back. And when it came to drugs, I remember I used to enjoy getting high as a teenager, like who doesn't? But I remember being 18 and visiting my dad at Christmas, and it was just such a sad, depressing feeling to see him in the midst of his addiction. Like, he used to like to roll a bunch of joints and put them in a cigarette container, like for his daily use, and he was heavily into crack cocaine, and I just really didn't like the feeling I would get like when I was with him. I've just never felt so low in my entire life when I was sitting with him and his addiction. So he's actually the one that inspired me to live my life a little bit differently and to stop doing drugs, and I'm so grateful for that. But I still have had to get on the right medication for my depression, and that's a whole different story. I'll hold this out this way. Because mental health can actually bring us to all sorts of low places, and despite not doing drugs and alcohol in my later years, I've still been to the Peter Lougheed Crisis Center and sought assistance through the Airdrie Addiction and Mental Health Clinic, and I really owe improving my mental health to taking dialectic behavioral therapy through Airdrie Mental Health, because it's taught me how to actually manage my mood disorder without having to use alcohol or exercise excessively, because those are more of the type of things I would do to manage it. Not that you can tell, but we've been in COVID. That's my excuse. So, but I do stand up here today, not so much as somebody that's still really struggling, but more as a First Nations warrior, because I have been through ceremony. I'm somebody that does speak for those who can't speak for themselves. And that includes the children that we've been discovering in the massive graveyards at residential schools. It includes people that we're losing to this untalked about epidemic, and many others. So I'm very pleased to be here today, not only as a woman, but as a warrior, to just lend the strength of my ancestors to all of the survivors and people left behind here tonight. And coming from my island of Hideaway, you might not know the story, but the majority of our population was lost to smallpox some 100 years ago, and to such a point that there's only 500 people left. I'm not sure if you can imagine that kind of epidemic, but people died faster than they could be buried, and it was just so hard for our population to rebuild itself and gain any of our culture back, especially after colonialism, because stepping out of cultural genocide is no easy task, and that's why so many Indigenous people are currently having issues with addiction. We have the highest jail population. It's just a different way of life. Like the colonial model doesn't fit our traditional model, and there's still very many issues we have to get past to create a brighter future for Turtle Island. But you can probably imagine the amount of ancestors I do have that are standing with me on these lands. And as a warrior, I'm very pleased to be able to offer you the protection of myself and my ancestors as we navigate our way forward through this epidemic and start taking away all the stigma attached to it. And that is my speech for tonight.